If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. Samuel Adams.
The time is near at hand, which must determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves. George Washington.
And what country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that this people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Thomas Jefferson.
Posterity, you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that ever I took half the pains to preserve it. John Adams.
I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Thomas Jefferson.
Government is instituted to protect property, this being the end of government. That alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is his own. That is not a just government, nor is property secure under it, where arbitrary restrictions, exceptions, and monopolies deny to part of its citizens that free use of their own faculties. James Madison.
It would be an absurdity for jurors to be required to accept the judge's view of the law against their own opinion, judgment, and conscience. John Adams.
Whenever the legislators endeavored to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. John Locke.
It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here, idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty, or give me death. Patrick Henry.
My people perish for the lack of knowledge. God.
And welcome to Patriots Lament. My name is Joshua Bennett. In studio today we have Mr. Mike Anderson. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
And as promised, we have a very special guest today, Mr. Richard Maybury. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Joshua and Mike. Thanks for having me on here today. Incidentally, I wanted to say you folks do such a great job here of giving people a alternative view of what's going on in the world, a unique view almost, unfortunately. And I just wanted to say thank you very much, that you're doing a great job, and I'm glad that people have this alternative that they can listen to once in a while to get a different view of what's really happening.
Well, thank you. That's very kind and very nice to come from you, because we have very, very high regard for you and your work.
Yeah, we do.
Folks, Mr. Maybury is the author and editor of the Early Warning Report, and I think of all the ways I've found you online, Richard, I think just Richard Maybury is probably the easiest, because everything just, that comes right up also.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also the author of many books, including my very favorites, the Uncle Eric series, which is still, in my mind, just so fantastic how, and I don't want to say they're simple because I don't want to downplay them, but the book, Whatever Happened to Justice, I have never been able to reach so many people to where it's like one of my brothers said, I just decided to quit talking to him and hand him the book and say, read this, then we'll talk. And it's just been, it's so simple and so profound at the same time that it's just a wonderful series. Well,
thank you very much.
I can't, if people you can order them online, or we have on our website. Just send us an email, and we'll send you any of the Mr. Maybury's books here. And also, I do encourage people you can subscribe to the Early Warning Report, and it's a monthly or bi-monthly, isn't it?
10 times a year.
10 times. Okay, so not quite either. And I want to discuss something because it's very pertinent to right now that you had in this month's article, and that's about the school shootings. If you don't mind, let's discuss that because it's on a lot of people's minds. People are it's horrible, it's wretched, and it hurts a lot of people, and it scares a lot of people, and people want answers, and unfortunately the knee-jerk reaction is usually not the right answer.
Yeah, the article is 4 pages long, and it gives you an explanation of where this problem came from, what's causing it, why these shooters do what they do, and it's information that's out there. Anybody can dig it up, but people don't want to do that. So I assembled it all and just gave this what I think is a pretty complete explanation, not only of why this is happening, but also of what the individual parent can do to protect his or her children. There are 9 suggestions in that article that explain things that you can do to make sure that your child stays safe. I would say, I guess the way to start this is the way the article does it is you have to go back to the days of the one-room schoolhouse. That's how most education happened in America before the 20th century, is in the one-room schoolhouse. And we have been taught that was a very primitive system and it didn't work very well. And that's all a lot of nonsense. The one-room schoolhouse did a fabulous job compared to these great big factory model schools that we have today. The individual schoolhouse had between let's say between 30 and 40 kids, and the important thing, the very, very important thing, is that they ranged in ages from 6 to 16. And so the school wasn't really so much a school as a tutoring center, and the kids helped each other, and they helped across ages. A lot of times it would be an older child that would tutor a younger child, but very often it was a younger child that would tutor an older child. You could have, for instance, a child who was 10 years old and was a whiz at math, and there was a 15-year-old who really had a lot of trouble with math, and the 10-year-old would tutor the 15-year-old. So the kids got what they individually needed, which is much different than today when you've got all these kids that are roughly the same age in a room. They're all on the same page at the same time, regardless of what the individual child needs. The one-room school was about individualized instruction. Give the individual child what that child needs at the time that child needs it. And that cannot be done in these giant factory model schools, which operate like an assembly line. The kid is put on the assembly line belt at age 5, and he goes down the line until age 17 or 18, and he comes out at the other end. And they all move at the same pace generally. They're, like I said, they're all on the same page at the same time, and it's a ridiculous thing. And now the important thing is where it came from. During the 19th century, socialism became the hot new philosophy that intellectuals all over the world were jumping onto. And when the Soviet Union was created after World War I, there was all kinds of people that went over there that thought, man, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is the way things ought to be done. And that way is giant mass production assembly line operations for everything. That's the socialist model that was adopted back then as the right way for humans to organize themselves. Well, these guys come back from the Soviet Union and they start preaching this socialist model all over the United States as well as the rest of the world. And what happened is the schools were turned into this giant socialist assembly line mass production system. And that's what we have today. A one-room school had maybe a maximum of 40 kids. The typical high school today in America, the average high school has 750. And the Florida shooting, which I talk about in the article, that school had 3,000.
Wow.
So you have these kids packed together like sardines, all of them within a few acres, sometimes in just one single gigantic building, a factory, and they are run down the assembly line in this factory. And they are, most importantly, segregated by age. So everybody in a classroom is roughly the same age. So a child is in a peer pressure cooker.
Yep.
Tremendous peer pressure. And with the new smartphones that are out, the peer pressure is just unbearable for tens of thousands of kids. It's horrible. And you can tell this by the suicide rates. Since the invention of the smartphone, the suicide rate among boys and girls of teen years has gone up. I mean, it's just skyrocketed. It's terrible. And it's because the kids are not, their minds aren't developed well enough to stand up against mob rule. And so this electronic mob rule that's occurring on these smartphones is driving them nuts. And that's what's happening. You have kids in every school, and I think probably everybody listening to us knows that remembers when you were in school, there were always kids who were the targets of the bullies, kids who were ridiculed. They were the outcasts, the black sheep, and the intense pressure on those kids today is just unimaginable. And they crack. Some of them crack. Now, most of them just commit suicide, but some of them are going after the other kids first before they commit suicide. And that's the really awful thing, and I show you the statistics on all of this in that article. The school shooting deaths are in an exponential growth curve. And I can't imagine anything more important that's going on in the world today. Is these schools, these peer pressure cookers, are driving these kids nuts, and the kids are becoming more and more violent. There's one thing, if there's anything that can be said about human behavior, that's a certainty, that we absolutely know for a fact about the human behavior, is that crowding makes things worse. Mm-hmm. And you take a typical classroom, there are 20, 30 kids in there, day after day after day. They can't choose who they're going to be in there with, and they have to endure whatever kind of ridicule is fired at them. It's awful. There are very few adults that could stand that environment year after year after year without going bananas. It's just awful. And if you talk to somebody who was one of the outcasts, one of the black sheep in years ago, ask them what it was like to be ridiculed, to have people laughing at you. How much did it hurt? It's a horrible thing. Now, I'm not making excuses for any murders or anything like that. I'm just explaining what happens to a child's mind when they are put into a peer pressure cooker. And the horrible thing here is that we've all been through it now. The socialists managed to create this system about a century ago. They eliminated the one-room schools. There was 190,000 one-room schools in America, and they eliminated them almost down to the last one.
Wow.
And replaced them all with these giant Soviet socialist factory model schools.
Wow. There's a couple things that I've never thought about until you just mentioned this. One is the school size, and I should have, because I read all the Little House on the Prairie books, and they had 20-some, 30 kids in there. But if you read the paper or whatever, the schools are always, the administration, whatever, is always complaining, oh, our class size is too big, it's too big. But I never thought about the part of the interaction with the kids being at different ages. And I know you're right, but I was thinking, without thinking, that, the 16-year-old boys just kind of hung out with themselves, and the 10-year-old girls hung out with themselves, and the 15-year-old boy. But you're right. I remember reading about that in the Little House books where they did interact, and I suppose it's a lot harder to have hatred and want to kill someone when you have that interclass interaction with such a widespread of ages, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And one of the most important things is when you have the older ones in there with the younger ones, the older ones protect the younger ones.
Right.
And they develop friendships with the younger ones and vice versa. And it becomes a very nurturing environment, one where you're not competing with people because you're all different ages and there's no competition really going on. It's actually, a one-room school is actually a large family, and it operated like a family where everybody helps everybody else. Much, much different than this case today, where the room is full of all kids one age, and the peer pressure is just murderous, literally murderous.
Well, yeah, and also the like you're pointing out, the ages being the same in a classroom. They in the system set up now, they don't develop that instinct to protect the younger ones. Instead, they develop cliques where they protect each other, and they form conflict with the younger ages or the older ages.
Yeah, that's really true. I think this competition that's created actually invades people's homes and ruins their home life, because the siblings within the home are competing with each other, because that's what they do at school. They're competing with each other, and that's brought home. And one kid gets an A grade and another kid gets a C grade. Well, what does that kid with the C feel about the one with the A?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just what was invented in the Soviet Union was a horrific system, and if you want to know how horrible it is, turn on the TV and look at what these schools are causing kids to do. It's just awful. Incidentally, because of this, because this is so essential to saving lives, we have taken that article of mine and put it on the internet where you can get it free. I'll give the URL here, and then I'll give it again later on if people want to get a paper and pencil. It's earlywarningreport.com/protect-children PDF.
That's awesome.
Okay, again, that's earlywarningreport.com/protect-children PDF. And again, I'll give it a little later if people want to get a paper and pencil.
Yeah, definitely, and I'll make sure and put that up as a link on our blog site too for folks.
Okay, good, thank you.
So what you're saying basically is that, well, you're saying a lot really, but I'm just sitting here, my mind's rolling while you're talking. I'm thinking about the simplistic ideas that people have with the problem of the education system is, well, they took away the paddle. If we just could beat those kids, by golly, everything would be fine again. And you're really digging at you're chopping at the roots, basically, because how many people really understand, for the most part, I think most Americans think communism's not good, even though most of them are socialist, but they don't understand that this school system came from the very core of communism. And and maybe that's why we're getting little commies out of the school system.
Oh, it undoubtedly is, yes. Yeah, this is no secret that the high schools and colleges and even the grade schools are dominated by socialists, because, as I said, all of us have been raised in this socialist system for a century now. We're on the fifth generation of kids who are being raised by parents and teachers who came through the peer pressure cooker system.
Wow.
So you've got, kids that are in the peer pressure cooker, being raised by adults who came through the peer pressure cooker and think that that's just the way life is supposed to be. It's miserable. You know, when you're a kid, it's just miserable. That's all. It's I mean, again, the word insane just keeps coming up, especially because the Soviet Union fell apart.
Right.
Their system doesn't work. It's very clearly a tremendous failure, but we're still using it for raising kids.
So you don't think that the answer is basically make it more of a prison and have the armed guards and the security and walk through the things and basically make it a lockdown? Because, you know, we hear that a lot. The president's done that a lot with, you know, I want to have armed guards and we'll set up security systems and metal detectors. And I guess a lot of them already have that. And it's almost to the point where a school, the entity itself, kind of models after a prison system.
Yeah. And as long as these peer pressure cooker factories exist, well, then you're going to have those security precautions. And I say right in the article, if these socialist systems are preserved, then it's going to be necessary that all of the teachers be armed and well-trained and regularly tested to make sure that they know how to respond to a shooting, because there's going to be a lot more of these incidents. And it's not just going to be guns. What will happen, I think, what's coming is the security systems will be so extreme that nobody will be able to get a gun into a school. So what will happen is the shooters, and I predicted this. Now, I wrote that article a month ago, and I said they will start going to bombs.
Yep.
Because you can't eliminate the bombs. The bombs are made out of all kinds of stuff. If you talk to a chemist, there are so many different ways and so many different things you can make a bomb out of. You cannot guard against the bombs. And so the kids will go in that direction. They'll start moving away from guns and going toward bombs.
Oh, and this kid had those.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm bragging about here.
Yeah, right.
I predicted it's going to go in that direction, and here we had a kid that had a bag full of bombs.
Well,
so,
it makes sense, because if they have a murderous intent, which is the one thing I guess you can't necessarily, legislate away.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to, one way or the other, figure out some way to do it.
Yeah. Right.
And mass explosions are not that we want to compare horrors to horrors, but a mass explosive is much worse.
Yeah, the Oklahoma City bomb.
Oh yeah.
Killed or injured almost 1,000 people. That's with one bomb. So yeah, if you take these kids' guns away, that's the direction they're going to go, and it's going to be a lot worse. So, and the thing that has to be done, is we've got to eliminate these peer pressure cookers and go back to the one-room school.
Yep. I absolutely agree. We get inundated with, we just need more money so we can do this. We need more money so we can do that. But that particular system has to be eliminated.
Yep.
Chucked. Absolutely. And that's a hard thing to swallow, because, you just said 5 generations have gone through that. And so we look at it like, well, how could it be wrong? I made it through.
Yeah. Yeah, you did, but the kids who committed suicide aren't here to tell us how much it hurt.
Right. Absolutely.
And like I said, the suicide rates are going crazy among teenagers. It's horrible. Since 2007, when the smartphone was invented, if I can get it right, suicide rates among girls have increased 30%. And suicide rates among boys, 100%.
Oh my goodness! Wow. We don't hear that.
Yeah, right. That's what Facebook is doing for your kid.
Right. Right. That's obscene.
It is. Yes, it is. But I can tell. I'm part of the reason I'm so passionate about this is not just that I'm trying to save the lives of children, but I was there myself. I was one of the black sheep. I was one of the outcasts.
Really?
Yes, I was. And I'll tell you, man, I mean, when I was in the military, there were quite a few cases where I nearly got killed. I was never as scared in the military when I was being shot at as I was when I was a kid marching off to school every morning.
Wow. That's pretty heavy. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. And nobody, what happens is the kid is getting along poorly in school, getting bad grades, is miserable and all that. And the doctors have not been told any of this that we're talking about here today. And so they think that, because the school is a normal, natural, healthy environment for children, if the kid can't get along there, and there's something wrong with the kid, and so they medicate him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just reading a statistic this morning. 14% of children age 8 or younger. Now get that. Age 8 or younger. 14% in America have already been diagnosed by a psychiatrist or someone else with some sort of mental problem.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then they do. I was going to ask you about that. What you thought about the doping of kids that are in school and the psychotropic drugs or whatever they call them. That seems. I've read a statistic where almost all the school shooters were on some kind of a school prescribed medication.
Yeah, right, definitely. And it's because it's assumed, we're all taught while we're growing up in these socialist schools, we're all taught that if you can't get along in school, well, that's your fault. That's not the school's fault. The school is a healthy environment, so if you can't adapt, there's something unhealthy about you. And that's where all this medication comes from.
That's pretty sick because, I'm sure there are some 8-year-olds that maybe have gone through something traumatic, but for the most part, I don't think it's 14% that need to have psychiatric checkups in a normal. Well, how about if they didn't go to a public school? I wonder what the percentage of it is of kids that don't go to public school when starting at 5 years old.
I don't know, but let me point out, I'm not letting the private schools off the hook here,
right?
Because they went along when the one-room schools were eliminated and the factory model schools were built. The private schools went along, and so they operate the same way in general. Now there are probably some exceptions out there that I've never seen, but certainly there are. But generally, it's the same thing. You've got a single classroom with 30 kids in it, all roughly the same age. It's a peer pressure cooker. The stars of the school do really well, and everybody talks about how wonderful they are. And then the black sheep, the outcasts, are miserable every day. The bullies pick on them. The rest of the crowd laughs at them. They are different in some way. Maybe they wear hand-me-down clothes, or they don't have the latest type of tennis shoe or something. They don't fit in for some reason.
Yeah.
They're different, and the crowd just jumps on them. It's horrible, I think black sheep is a very good term for those kids, and they don't know there's anything wrong. They're raised, they're told school is a great place. You should be doing well here. Why are you miserable? It must be something wrong with you. And that makes it all the worse,
Yeah.
People telling the kids. And the grading system. You add the grading system on top of that, where we describe children as if they are lumber or eggs. We have A children and B children and C children, just like we grade lumber and eggs. And they come to think of themselves as that kind of a person. When I was a kid, I was a D person. And it didn't matter what the teacher said or my parents said. They said, you're not working hard enough. You're smart. You can do it. No, I knew I could. I had an official school document that said I was a D person, and so that's what I was.
Wow.
And I gave up ever trying to do well in school because I knew I was a D person. And so the grading system, too, is awful. You should use a proficiency system where the kid is just, the parent every once in a while meets with a teacher, and the teacher says, well, in arithmetic, your child is at this stage. It seems to be kind of weak in this area and that area, so we will give him some extra help there and bring him up to where he can do long division. When he gets to long division, fine, he's accomplished that. And just do away with the grading system altogether and have the teacher report to the parent, this is where the kid is, this is where he needs to be, and this is what we're going to do to get him there.
Mm-hmm. So let's, on the next half of this, let's talk about what the answer part. What do people do? Now, for myself, my wife and I, we homeschooled our kids because we looked at, I despise the public school system because exactly what you're saying. It's a socialist communist system, and we decided not to go the private school system because I didn't really see a whole lot different. Like you just said, the model's not any different. And the peer pressure is not going to be any different. So we decided to homeschool, and I'm glad we did. And I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't do it different. Definitely not. Plus, you might be happy to know that at our school, we studied Richard Maybury books.
Well, good. Thank you.
They don't get those too much. I shouldn't say that. I know that you have had people. I've read stuff that people have had them at their private schools. But what are some answers? Because not everyone is going to homeschool. Not everyone's going to pull them out and do this. They may feel stuck where, well, my kid has to go to the public school, or I don't know. I'll let you go.
Okay. Again, the article has 9 things that a parent can do to keep the child safe. And let me give you that URL again real quick. It's earlywarningreport.com/protectchildren.pdf. Again, that's earlywarningreport.com/protectchildren.pdf. Now, I think the most important suggestion I have in there for keeping the children safe, not just in a shooting, but every day to try to protect the child's mind and child's ego and self-esteem and all of that, so that they can be happy as children, is to warn them about peer pressure. When every good parent, every so often, warns the child about drugs and sex and alcohol, those sorts of things. Well, peer pressure is the pusher of those evils. Mm-hmm. And so explicitly warn your child against peer pressure. Explain to the child what's going on. And I give you some places you can look. In that article, I give you some places you can look on the Internet to find suggestions about overcoming peer pressure. There are quite a few good articles out there about it because there are people beginning to realize that this is the really big killer, is peer pressure. And warn your kids about them. It's the reason you have so much of this insanity among teenagers with the crazy sex that goes on electronically and the use of tobacco and alcohol and drugs. The reason you have it mostly is because of peer pressure. The kids do it because they are pressured into it by their friends. They know if they want to be accepted by some group, they've got to behave like that group and do what that group does. Mob rule. And you have to constantly warn your child against peer pressure. And I think that's the single most important thing you can do, other than actually getting the child out of that environment and having them in a homeschool situation or a very, very small private school, perhaps. But again, the peer pressure is the thing you've got to overcome. You cannot solve this problem unless you immunize your child against peer pressure.
So that's something that people don't really like to hear, though, is that because I say there's a large portion of parents that send their kids to school so they don't have to be responsible for them.
Yeah.
But you're saying that, sorry, folks, you need to be responsible for your kids.
Yeah. When the homeschooling movement began, like in the early 90s, I was immediately, it actually didn't begin then, but when it really started taking off in the 90s, early 90s, I gave a few speeches to various groups, and consistently the whole crowd would say, "Wow, that's great. I understand now. I know what I need to do to raise a happy, healthy child." The one demographic that would be outraged at it was young mothers or young women who expected to be mothers. They would get so angry because their comment to me was always some version of, "Look, I signed on to raise kids for 5 years, not for 18.
Wow. Wow. That's terrible.
Yeah, but that's what I got. And I can understand that. I
Sure.
mean, they're told that they should go out and have a career and do various things that an independent woman would do, and they want to do that, and I sure would feel that way if I were them. And implicit in that, nobody ever says it to them directly, but implicit in that is that at some point you're going to turn your kid over to somebody else to be raised.
Right.
And now they're turning the child over to the school. That's what's conventionally done, because it's been done for 100 years, and everybody thinks that's the normal way. But let me tell you, if there are any parents out there listening, nobody cares about your child as much as you do.
Right.
And if you want your child raised well, then you should do the raising. Because I can tell you, there's nobody in that school that cares about your kid as much as you do.
What do you say to folks that, because I run into this quite a bit, talking to people about the public school, just friends of mine and stuff. Well, it's not my school. My school is really good. Or I've seen, whatever good from this or that. And I've tried to say, well, your particular child might be doing okay, but you don't know everything that's going on. And just because your particular child is doing good doesn't mean the system's okay.
Yeah. I was a teacher for 4 years, and my wife was a teacher for 8 years. And between us, we have experience in all grades from kindergarten through senior in high school. And let me tell you, nobody knows what's going on inside these cliques of children.
Right.
These groups. You have no idea what kind of pressure is being brought on your kid. Your kid probably doesn't know, feels the pressure, but has no understanding of what it is or where it comes from. And that's something that you might want to think about, is that if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 children, and you know how hard it is to keep track of them. Now, they're in your home. They're living with you in their home, and you know them intimately. You know everything there is about them, but you still have trouble keeping track of them.
Right.
Well, do you really think that a teacher is going to keep track of 30 of them? I used to it used to take me till Christmas to learn the names of all of my students.
Wow.
That's all I knew about them, is their names. And if I was lucky, and usually the semester ended and I had to start all over again. I knew practically nothing about these children. And, I had gone to college. I had gone through the teacher training courses and all of that, where they're supposed to teach you how to be a teacher. And you find out right away when you're in the classroom that you've got no idea because you don't know those individual children. You don't know their individual characteristics. There's a lot of talk about, well, what's good for a child, what's bad for a child, how should the school operate in order to take care of children. Well, there's no children. There's just this child and that child
right.
and the other child. They are individuals just as much as adults are, and you can't learn very much about them if you're a teacher. You just cannot. There's just no time. And, there's no job harder in the world than being a teacher if you care about the kids. It is emotionally wrenching like you can't imagine if you care about the kids, because you don't know them. You know they're in pain, but you don't know them. You don't know why. You're operating mostly in the dark most of the time.
So you're saying also, though, the training for the teachers is kind of the socialist model also, or they train them to look at the kids in the socialist model.
That's right.
The groupthink, the mob.
Exactly. Yes, that's really true. That's a good insight, actually. The point of all of this among the socialists back there a century and more ago was that they wanted a socialist world to live in. And they had all kinds of ideas from Marx and Lenin and other socialists about how that world should look. And so they created schools that would produce what they called the new socialist man. And the new socialist man would be trained to think as a socialist and would therefore be comfortable living in a socialist society. And these schools that these kids are going to now are built to produce the new socialist man. This is an experiment that was imposed on us starting 100 years ago. An experiment. And we're still all going through this experiment. We're a bunch of guinea pigs, all of us.
Well, it seems to be like it's working pretty well, at least for them.
It is. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
I don't like to knock the millennials too much, but this give me mine for nothing kind of thing is, they're pumping out the socialists, that's for sure.
Yeah.
One of the arguments you hear if you talk to someone about homeschooling versus public school is I want my children to be socialized.
Right.
Well, of course, my first thought is I don't want them socialized. I want them capitalized. But
that's very well said. Thank you for that.
But the fact is, they go to a public school and they get into the cliques that we talked about. They're not being socialized. They're being confined to a specific age group and a specific mindset that's been created among their own clique.
Yep.
They're not getting the socialization that the parents claim that they need. When I was an introvert as a kid. I still am, but some of that was caused by the experiences I had in public school, and I look at myself at that age, and I look at my son who's 10. He is not an introvert in any way whatsoever. He sees someone, he goes out and just starts talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know anything about cliques. He's never experienced any kind of bullying or name calling. When I was a kid, I was kind of a geek. I was scrawny. I wore a headgear. I was picked on in junior high, and the only way that I stopped that was by slugging a kid in the stomach who was bullying me. And I went on to middle school in another state, and it wasn't as rough of a school. But I remember the experience I had there was two girls came up to my desk in art class to talk to me, two of the cheerleaders, and I thought, well, they're trying to set me up or something, trying to embarrass me. So I wouldn't talk to them. I realized as the year went on, these were actually nice girls, and they always were all the way up through high school. They were just being nice to me. But because of the experiences I had in junior high, before that, I didn't trust them. I became introverted.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to a lot of them. It doesn't happen to my son, though.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. One of the things one of the lies that are foisted onto parents is that when your child is in school, your child is being raised by the teacher. That is just totally wrong. The teacher is spread very thin, as I said, knows very little about the kids, can do very little one-on-one type of instruction or counseling or whatever. One-on-one practically does not exist in this school, the factory model school. And so the child really isn't raised by the teacher. The child is raised by the other children.
Yep.
And that's who the parent is for 6 hours a day that the kid is in school. The parent is the other children, and they, of course, don't know anything at all. And so it's your child is raised by the mob.
Yeah, they don't know anything, and they pass that wisdom on.
And then many of them, when they come,
that's right.
Yeah. And then many of them, when they come home, the TV is their parent for the next 4 hours.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what do you say when people would say that? Well, you said a better model was this one room school, but you said that there's 30 to 40 people and only one teacher. What's the was it just because was the difference because there was the different age groups and they were all combined into the one thing, or is it the segregation of the ages that's part of the problem?
Well, that was part of the solution, the segregation.
Right.
Oh, yeah, you mean in the public school? Yeah, it's the having all the same age in a single room means you got a room full of peers.
Yep.
That's a terrible thing. You want a room just like a family, you know.
Right.
You want a room full of various ages that will help each other. That the older ones will feel protective toward the younger ones. And that who understand. Well, there's another point here. Every teacher knows that you never learn something as well as when you teach it. That's an iron law of
right.
teaching. Every teacher knows that. Well, in a one-room school, it was mostly kids tutoring other kids. So each kid, probably not every kid, but most kids were tutors. They taught, and so when you had the 10-year-old teaching the 15-year-old how to do math, that 10-year-old was learning math much, much better than kids do today because that 10-year-old was teaching it.
Right. And they're learning,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that
Yeah.
up. It's I think that the numbers are you remember about 10% of what you hear, about 20 or 30% of what you read, and 80% of what you teach.
Oh, yes, that's good, excellent. I never heard that before, but that really jives with my experience.
So the kids who are tutoring are learning the subject much better.
Well, and they're also learning a valuable life skill set too when they grow up and become parents.
Yeah, and they're learning how to do the interaction, and they're learning,
Yeah.
So.
Now, I know that there's somebody listening to this that's saying, yeah, but these big factory model schools, these mass production systems, do teach better, that kids are much more well-educated today than they were back in the 19th century. And all I can do is say, get on the Internet and search for 8th grade graduation tests, 19th century, and take those tests, because you will find very few college graduates today that can pass those 8th grade tests.
Really?
From the 1800s, yes.
I've always looked at it a little more simply just because I've thought, well, haven't seen the schools produce too many Jeffersons lately.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I didn't know that. I'm gonna look that up after the program because I'd like to see what one is.
Yeah, 8th grade graduation test, 19th century.
One thing about homeschooling also is I've not known of any school shootings at home schools.
Yeah, right, absolutely. In fact, the article contains some statistics on that, and the school shootings really did not start until the 1960s, which is when the last of the the one-room schools was eliminated.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's when the school shootings started.
They did start back that far back, though.
Yeah, right, about the 1960s. But they were there's very few of them.
Right.
It's the advent of the smartphone that has, in my opinion, been the really big triggering factor. That the peer pressure from those phones is something that very few human beings could endure.
Well, the public school system isn't going to disappear tomorrow, obviously. And so as we're winding down here, I feel like this is the fastest hour ever. I know. What are other things, or do you just want to leave to have folks look it up online? But I know there's got to be folks out there that are tormented with this issue and just don't know what to do. Well,
very quickly, I can tell you, you just better accept the fact that there are going to be more school shootings. And it's, if you live in a place where there are tornadoes, there's going to be tornadoes. If you live where there's earthquakes, there's going to be earthquakes. And if you live in a place where there are these factory model schools, then you're going to have school shootings.
Wow.
You just have to integrate that into your view of the world. And one of the things to do is take your child to the school and show the child escape routes. If the shooting starts, you go this way to get away, and teach them. I've got a 20-word formula to teach them that's in that article. I can't think of it right off the top of my head, but the 20 words, and what they amount to is the shooting starts, run fast and far, and speed and concrete are your best friends. And take them around that school and show them the parts of the walls of the school that'll stop a bullet. That's a safe place. A wall that will not stop a bullet is a dangerous place. Get them thinking that way so that they have the ability to make wise decisions in this split second when they need to do it. And that's the main thing. Another one of the rules is don't get cornered. Whatever you do, don't get cornered. And be as quiet as you possibly can so you don't draw attention to yourself. There's some other things, and there are a whole lot of articles on the Internet. I give, in the article, I give places to look where they get into the details of all this very carefully. It's things that soldiers are taught. And I was a soldier, so I know a lot of it. And it'll keep you alive. I mean, it's important. It'll keep you alive. So teach it to your kids.
Man, it's a sad thing, but you know what? It's actually maybe a good thing because maybe the parent will, as he's going through it, realize how ridiculous it is what he's having to teach his child to go through modern warfare to go to a public school.
Yes. Yeah. By the way, John. By the way, Johnny, we love you so much. Every day we're going to send you to this place where you might get shot at a mass killing because we have to go to our job and pay taxes.
Right. Yeah.
Man.
It's grim, but that's what the socialists did to us. Again, it's been going on for a century. We are all guinea pigs in this socialist educational system. It's an experiment. Keep that in your mind all the time. To go to a school is to be a guinea pig in an experiment.
That's pretty rough. I mean, that's not nice to think about.
And it's the teachers, too. I'm not blaming teachers for anything because they went to the same schools. They were brainwashed the same way the rest of us were. And this is as hard on them as it is on the kids.
Yeah.
It is really a miserable job if you care about the kids because you see so much pain every day.
That's terrible. But, it's... I guess it's just the reality, like you said. You have to expect it again and again and again. And there's not, confiscating everyone's guns isn't going to happen. It won't work. And like you said, the mindset is that you take away the guns anyways, they'll find another way to kill.
Yeah, they'll go to bombs, and it'll be a whole lot worse. I live in a part of the country where there are rattlesnakes, and every parent just raises the kid. This is what a rattlesnake is. This is how it behaves. When you're around a rattlesnake, this is what you should do. So treat the schools the same way. You just teach your kid the precautions.
Mm-hmm. Goodness. No, it makes sense. It's just, for me, it's hard to even. I wouldn't send them into that situation, but the situation's there and people do, so it's best to arm them in whatever way that you can to protect themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's let them off the hook here.
Sure. That's what I meant.
It's really important to understand that the reason so many people send their kids to these schools is because they're being taxed to death and they don't have the money to raise their kids themselves.
Absolutely.
So, that's the whole thing is that in a typical household where a man and a woman are both working, one person's income goes to support the government. The other one goes to support the family.
Well, they've also been trained in that cliquish mentality that they have to, we call it compete with the Joneses. They need a new car, so they have to make the $400 or $500 payment every month.
Because they've been through the same system.
Yeah, they're trying to live up to the system that they were taught when they were in junior high and high school.
Wow.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, it's a never-ending cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly. It is. Yeah, as you say, the socialists won. They just managed to brainwash us all, and you've got to break out of that.
Well, sir, we're down at the end of this hour, and I can see the people. I guess they're having an auction today, so we don't get to keep going. But I'm thankful for one that you're out there to arm us with the truth.
Well, thank you.
Ways that we can make our lives better and live through the socialism. And thank you again for being on our 7th anniversary show.
Yes, thank you.
Well, congratulations on your 7th anniversary. And again, I really admire the work you're doing. You give people an alternative point of view that they aren't likely to get anyplace else. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And folks, remember, Mr. Maybury, it's Richard Maybury. Just look him up on Google it, and his early warning report will come up, and definitely subscribe. And Richard, thank you again. I hope you and your wife have a good weekend here, and hopefully I'll try to bug you to come back again sometime.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joshua and Mike.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks, that does it for today, unfortunately. I guess they're having the auction next, so we are going to go and let them come in, so don't bother calling for Patriot Cement issues. Well, if you want to, that's fine. But we'll talk to you later. Bye.